square root method. So today we want to talk about how to solve quadratic equations in the form ax squared plus c equals 0 using the square root method. So you should recognize that we don't have that plus bx. So if you only have an x squared term and then constants without an x term, we can use the square root method to solve. So the very first step is to isolate the squared term. So here we have the squared term, so let's isolate. We want to add 60 to both sides. Then we have 3x squared equals 60. Then, to get that x squared by itself, divide by 3. So we have x squared equals 20. So we're done with step 1. And then step 2, take the square root of both sides. And don't forget the plus or minus sign in front of the radical. So when we take the square root of both sides, the square root and the squared are going to cancel out. So on the left side, we're just left with x. On the right side, we're taking the square root of 20, so we need to put that plus or minus sign because we know that we have two possible answers whenever we take the square root of a number. Done with step 2. Now on to step 3. Simplify the radical if possible. So 20 is not a perfect square, so if you take the square root of it, you're going to get a decimal. So we want to see if we can simplify this at all. 20 is equal to 4 times 5. 4 is equal to 2 times 2, and 5 is prime. So we have the 2's that pair up, 1 gets out, 1 doesn't, and the 5 is stuck inside. So now we've completed step 3, and then our final step, write your final answer in the form x equals plus or minus our answer, which is our simplified radical, 2 square root of 5. So here's our final answer. If we were to take positive 2 square root of 5 and negative 2 square root of 5 and put it back in for x, then this side of the equation would end up equaling 0. Go ahead and follow those steps and work out example 1 and check back with me when you're finished. Hopefully you added 180 to both sides first and then divided both sides by 5, so you get x squared equals 36. Then when you take the square root to eliminate that squared with the x, you should get a final answer of x equals plus or minus 6. So I want you to go ahead and try the second example, which is very similar to the first, but we have this fraction. So think about how we talked about how to get rid of these fractions when they're multiplied by a variable. So pause, try it, and check back with me when you're finished. So in the second example, you should add 8 to both sides first, and when we're trying to get rid of that 2/3, that's multiplied by the x squared, we want to multiply by the reciprocal. So flip the fraction and multiply both sides by 3 over 2. That way these fractions will cancel out. Then you're left with your x squared equal to 36. Then when you take the square root of both sides, you should get an answer of x equals plus or minus 6. Now we want to work out a couple examples that have the same idea. We're still using the square root method to solve, but it's just a few different steps than what we did before. So I'll work out example 3 with you, and then I want you to try example 4. In example 3, you should see that the squared term is outside of a set of parentheses. So the very first step we take in solving to isolate the squared term, we actually want to get this whole thing by itself. So to isolate the squared term, we want to add 36 to both sides. Now we've isolated that squared term. 3x plus 1, parentheses squared, equals positive 36. Now from here, since our squared term is isolated, this is where we want to take the square root of both sides. Now, these cancel out, so we're left with 3x plus 1 on the left, and then when we take the square root of 36, we end up with plus or minus 6. Now, once we get here, Our x is not isolated. That means we need to continue to isolate until we have just a number equal to x. But here we have plus or minus 6. So this is where we're actually going to split into two different problems. The first one is going to be 3x plus 1 equals the positive 6. And the second one is going to be 3x plus 1 equal to negative 6. Now let's solve for both x values. Subtract 1, you get 3x equals 5, and divide by 3. So we get x is equal to 5/3. There's one answer. Here, subtract 1, and then we get 3x is equal to negative 7. Divide by 3, and we get x equals negative 7/3. So these are going to be our two answers. X is equal to negative 7/3 and 5/3. So I want you to follow those steps and the things we've talked about before and work out example 4 and check back with me when you're finished. So for your first step, you should subtract 4 from both sides, and then you want to divide both sides by 3 so that we can isolate the x minus 2 squared. Then once that's isolated, you take the square root of both sides. So we have x minus 2 equals plus or minus 4. Now once we've gotten rid of all the radicals, that's where we split into the two different ones so we can finish solving for x. So we have x minus 2 equals positive 4 and x minus 2 equals negative 4. When you add 2 to both sides to solve, we get x equals positive 6. And over here, when you add 2 on both sides to solve, we get x equals negative 2. So you should get a final answer of x equals negative 2 and negative 6. That's it. I'll see you in class.